Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tushe Namaha Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Is somebody recording the class? No? Is somebody recording the class? I think it's just useful because sometimes it doesn't work, I think. It's okay, I'll do it. I think last week's class was recorded. Vilas Manjari Mataji had posted it, right? The voice is too low? Okay, I had also recorded a copy. I can share it if you'd like. Share it. Like this? Sorry, how do you want me to adjust it? Oh, this is good for me. I mean, it works, right? Or do you want me to put it the other way?
Yeah, just a near this part here, this obviously. Try this one.
Just like this?
I think this way is easier.
Okay. I can't find the hook here. There it is. Thank you. Is there anyone who can offer a summary of what we discussed last week? Anyone? Summary of last week? No? Okay. So what was the topic of chapter 7? What is the name of the chapter? Knowledge of the Absolute. Where is? Not exactly. That's not the title. But that is the theme, major theme that runs through the chapter. So the topic of chapter 7 was knowledge of the Absolute, or in Sanskrit, the Lord's opulences. So it refers to Vibhuti Yoga. Sorry, not Vibhuti Yoga, sorry. Stages of surrender. Yes, it does talk about that. It focuses on the knowledge that allows one to walk through the path of surrender to Krishna. And based on the level to which one is able to imbibe that knowledge into one's heart, there are degrees of surrender. And so therefore, either one is able to practice pure bhakti or is able to practice something closer to that path. Now, what was the knowledge of Krishna that was spoken of in the 7th chapter? So from 7, what was the speciality of 7.4 and 7.5? That Maya? Yes, it is distinguished, but is there something more than that? Because material nature and living entities were also distinguished in the 2nd chapter, right?
Krishna is not affected by the 3 modes.
Yeah, but 4 and 5. Verse 4 and verse 5 of the 7th chapter. Yes. Yes. So the first part was there. The second part will be mentioned later on. But yes, the material energy is Krishna's energy. So that was not specifically mentioned before. And the living entity in the 5th verse is mentioned as being Krishna's energy. And that was also not previously directly referenced. Then from verse 7 onwards, there is a specific theme that runs. Verse 7 tells us what? That he's the ultimate cause. What does the ultimate cause here mean? That everything ultimately begins from him. Every other cause ultimately has Krishna as its cause. And then from verse 8 onwards, through to, yes. But then what is the specific purpose of mentioning all these things? So we discussed how in the creation of the material world, you start with Prakriti, and you go to Mahat Tattva, you go to Sutra Tattva, you go to Ahankar. And in Ahankar, you have, in the mode of goodness, you have certain products like mind, etc. In passion, you have the senses, intelligence. And then in ignorance, so you have the 5 sense objects and the 5 material elements. So what were the 5 elements? Those are the sense objects, right? Ether, air, fire, water, and earth. And each element successively includes the above elements. And the sense objects corresponding to these elements were sound for ether, air, yes, form, taste is water, fragrance, earth. So we discussed how initially sound is produced. From sound, ether is produced. From ether, touch is produced. Touch, air is produced. Air, form is produced. From form, fire is produced. From fire, taste is produced. Taste, water is produced. Water, fragrance is produced. Fragrance produces earth. So when Krishna says, I am the taste of water, what he's saying is that I am the material element, taste, that is the material or the immediate cause of any effect in this world. And when Krishna says that I'm the ultimate cause, what is he saying? I am Mahavishnu, upon whom the entire material world rests, or I'm Krishna, upon whom even the material world rests. But ultimately it's under Krishna's direction that this entire material world is running. So that represents the ultimate cause. And here we have the immediate or material cause. And then there's a third cause, which is referenced, the material elements, sound, touch, form, taste, fragrance. And there are other examples where he describes himself as being the essence, that sits behind any endeavor, like I'm the strength of the strong, I am lust devoid of passion and desire, I am the syllable Om in the Vedic mantras, I'm the sound in ether, again from here, sound that produces the element ether, I am the ability in man, I am the heat of the fire, I am the soul of everything that lives, I am the penance or the tapas of all those who perform tapasya. But what Krishna is saying is that anything that allows any effect in this world, you go even one step back and you look at the immediate cause, he's saying that that is my potency. And that's what Krishna is saying in these verses. When he's saying it's the ultimate cause, he's saying that everything ultimately rests upon him and is completely dependent upon him. The third cause that we discussed was what? We called it the instrumental cause. So sometimes the instrumental cause can either be time, or the modes of nature, or you can say Maya in general. So if Krishna is the ultimate cause, the instrument through which Krishna gets work done is Maya. And the specific element with which Krishna gets work done, whether it's strength, heat, tapasya, or some kind of element like this, is known as the material cause. We had an example that we gave last week to describe this. Does anyone remember that example? Pottery. So what was that example?
The clay used to make the pot was the elemental cause, and that represents you. And then the instrument, which is the potter's wheel.
So you have the person,
Yeah.
okay, and then you have the instrument.
The clay.
The instrument is the clay? So,
Oh, it's the elemental cause.
of course, it's not exactly like this. Sorry. I think it's like a spike in between or something. But then you have the clay itself, the mud, which is spinning about. So the clay represents what? Abhidaya Mataji?
The elemental cause.
The elemental, yes. Or material cause. The instrument represents?
It's Maya, the elemental cause.
The instrumental. Elemental is the immediate material cause. Water? Potter is the instrumental? Not necessarily. He could be seen as an instrument, but really the instrument itself. What is the agency through which something is done? The potter's wheel. So, I mean, it depends on how you phrase this analogy. Sometimes, if the person is seen as the ultimate cause, then the wheel can be seen as the instrumental cause, and the pot itself is seen as the elemental cause. However, the problem with this analogy as it's expressed implies, because the pot is actually physically involved in performing the activity, does Vishnu get personally involved in creating the world? Not really.
If there was a commissioner, someone who commissions the pot.
So someone who commissions the pot. So another person who sits behind here and requests that something be done. So the personality through whom Vishnu commissions this work is Shiva. So from that point of view, Shiva is seen as, as a cause of the material world. Whether he's an instrumental cause or not is a different question. But then Maya, or the agency of time, which causes things to function in this world, is seen as the instrumental cause. And then the actual pot itself is the material cause. But in expressing this analogy, what this part of the Bhagavad Gita says is that Krishna is everything. So whatever we may do in this world, we just look to see, what is the inspiration, what is the source. If there's someone who's done something very brilliant, that the intelligence is Krishna. If someone has, achieved something very big, that ability to do what they do, it's Krishna. If someone says, humanism is a very powerful force, or they say love is a very powerful force, but that feeling and emotion is Krishna, but perhaps in a perverted form, but that is Krishna. And ultimately, everything that we are attracted to, or moved by, or influenced by in this world, is ultimately Krishna himself. So when a person understands this, what is the realization they have? They? Go on, express it. They? Go on, go on. No, Mataji. Why do they depend on Krishna? Yeah, but this, I would phrase it as slightly more differently. What I would phrase it as is, whatever I'm depending on, I am as it is depending on Krishna. So rather than depend on Krishna indirectly, why don't I just depend on Krishna directly? I'm seeking, for example, attraction in a particular relationship with someone whom I find attractive. So why don't I just go to Krishna, who is the most attractive? If I'm attracted to intelligence, why don't I go to Krishna? Because he's the most intelligent. And so it produces this sense of there's nothing else that I need to do except to worship Krishna. Now, if you can turn to verse 3 of the 9th chapter, Srila Prabhupada's purport to this verse is quite extraordinary. Of course, chapter 9 speaks about pure devotional service. And this verse speaks about the pure faith that one needs to have in Krishna, without which pure devotional service doesn't work. So if you look at the phrase, we will cover it again when we cover the 9th chapter, but here it is. Ashraddha dhana purusha, that a purusha, a person who doesn't have faith, and Prabhupada will describe this faith later on. 9.3. Dharma asya, so this dharma which I'm going to speak of, this pure dharma of pure devotional service, O Parantapa, O conqueror of enemies, aprapya mam nivartante, if one doesn't have faith, full faith in this process, then they don't achieve me. Rather, mrityu samsara vartmani, they return to the path of birth and death in this world. Now here is Srila Prabhupada's purport. He says, the faithless cannot accomplish this process of devotional service. That is the purport of this verse. Faith is created by association with devotees. Unfortunate people, even after hearing all the evidence of Vedic literature from great personalities, still have no faith in God. Then Prabhupada will say, thus faith is a most important factor for progress in Krishna consciousness. Now Prabhupada will define faith. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it is said that faith is the complete conviction that simply by serving the Supreme Lord Sri Krishna, one can achieve all perfection. Does anyone know this verse from Chaitanya Charitamrita? Shraddha Shabde Vishwas Kohe Sudrida Nishchoy Krishna Bhakti Kaila Sarva Karma Krita Hoy. So Shraddha Shabde. So Shraddha Shabde means that word Shraddha, Vishwas Kohe. It is called a faith. What type of faith? Sudrida Nishchoy. And this faith is held with very strong conviction. Again, what is this faith? Krishna Bhakti Kaila. By performing devotional service to Krishna, Sarva Karma Krita Hoy. Everything else is achieved. If I worship Krishna, every need that I have in my heart, whether it's to be an artist, whether it is to have a career, whether it's to have, do something in this world, that can be perfectly satisfied just by serving Krishna. If I serve Krishna, it's not that I need to do any austerities external to devotional service. It is not that I need to do any particular karmic activity external to devotional service. By simply worshipping Krishna, everything else is automatically achieved. Like sometimes in India, this actually happened in the Gaudiya Math time. One of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta's disciples, his father had passed away. And Srila Bhakti Siddhanta told him that all you have to do is follow Vaishnava samskaras for your departed father. You just have to perform a Harinam and feed the Vaishnavas and seek their blessings. That would be sufficient. But this devotee had come from a background which was very, very, what's the phrase? That he come from a particular culture and he had very strongly identified with that culture. For him to not perform those cultural rites, he didn't feel like he was doing the right thing by his father. What does this reflect, by the way, identification with culture? material platform. So what was the mistake in his understanding?
He was identifying as being someone from that particular country rather than the soul.
Yes. But why was he able to see, or why was he seeing that those rituals as being separate from his worship of Krishna?
Because he came from that background, but he is waiting for other people.
Because he didn't see Krishna as being the inspiring force behind that yajna. He didn't see that Krishna was the purifying force behind the rituals of those yajnas. So therefore he had more faith in those rituals, which he saw as being separate from Krishna. And so Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, even despite his spiritual master's instructions, he still went to the Ganga and performed those rites. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta even said that our disciple doing this shows the defeat of the Gaudiya Math. Because, when someone is preaching the principles of pure bhakti, and even those who are practicing pure bhakti and preaching pure bhakti don't have faith that by hearing and chanting about Krishna everything is achieved, then there's a problem. Sometimes in India, of course, you take out drishti. Like drishti means like you remove bad sight. So if your kids go outside and play or something, they come back, then even Mother Yashoda does this. But there's a feeling like, unless I do this, then, my child will have a problem. What's another Vaishnava way of doing this? You could just chant like, Nashinga, Kavacha, or you circumambulate the child. This is in the Samskara book. You touch each part of the child's body and with Krishna's names to protect the child all around. But everything that we think we need to do outside, actually by worshipping Krishna, it can be accomplished. Another big thing, who here has followed astrology? Anyone coming from a traditional family? So those who follow astrology, when they go to an astrologer, what kind of advice do we normally get? Perform some puja, wear some ring. That's a famous one actually. Wear a particular type of ring, or go and do some rituals. Someone told Yamini that during a bad time, you need to go and give on Thursdays or something. You need to give salt to beggars, and I was like, there are no beggars in Australia. And then he said, okay, the next best thing, you go to the ocean, you put it there. But the inspiring force behind all of these rituals is Krishna, and such advice is actually not needed or necessary. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, in fact, wrote instructions to say that rather than worshipping, for example, the particular demigods in charge of each of the planets, like Shani or Rahu, to remove at that time, one would instead worship the form of the Vishnu deity who sits behind each of those planets. So, for example, there was one devotee who was an astrologer in Melbourne who had advised me to worship Lord Nrsingadev and chant particular prayers to Lord Nrsingadev when there was a bad time. Or for those who are strongly influenced by the sun in a negative way, to worship Sri Ramachandra, or by the moon Krishna. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta actually wrote instructions to describe how these deities, these forms of the Lord could be worshipped if one wanted those specific results. But actually the faith of pure bhakti is still higher than this. And the faith is that if I just worship Krishna, Krishna will take care of me. Sarva karma krita hoy. They have negative faith in Krishna. Yeah. The thing is that they don't ask for instructions before they do something, and when something bad happens, they say it's because of Krishna. Yeah, but do they seek guidance before they perform an activity? It's like, for example, suppose I leave everything and go somewhere else to work, and that doesn't turn out so well. Whose instruction did I seek before I went there? Nobody's. It's just my own desire. I left a good job, I left a good city, and I went somewhere. If I marry someone and the relationship is going sour, who made the choice to marry? Suddenly nobody goes and talks to the deities, asks a spiritual master for inspiration. Most people go to astrologers, even they usually want, most astrology in India tends to come out favorably. They say, okay, just do some puja, you can take care of it. Whose guidance are they seeking? Krishna has laid out certain principles. If they follow, then even if it's a difficult time, they can they can actually have shelter. Most of our problems are actually created by ourselves, actually.
That's correct.
It's not really because of, Krishna. And the other part of this is that when good things happen, we tend to credit ourselves. I got a promotion because I did so well. It's not balanced. The feeling that sits behind that statement is a sense of entitlement. I deserve this. I'm a good man or a good lady. I've done so many nice things. And I deserve this. I'm entitled to get it. From their perspective, sure. It is a great gift to be able to see ourselves as others see us, or as Krishna sees us. A very great gift. Because then we understand the biases and perspectives we bring to a particular situation. Most people, unfortunately, don't have that. They come from a particular background and they remain so fixed in that point of view. It's a very, it's a very destructive trait. And the only people that make themselves unhappy are themselves and those intimately connected to them. Does that answer the question? So going on with Srila Prabhupada's purport. Now Srila Prabhupada will describe this using another verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam. 9.3. So continuing with the purport. So Prabhupada says, that is called real faith. As stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam 4.31.14, Yata taror mula nishechanena tripyanti tatskanda bhujopashakaha pranopahar chayatendriyanam tataiva sarvarhanam achyutecha. By giving water to the root of a tree, one satisfies its branches, twigs and leaves, and by supplying food to the stomach, one satisfies all the senses of the body. Similarly, by engaging in the transcendental service of the Lord, one automatically satisfies all the demigods and all other living entities. Again, there are some people, for example, who say, why bother having a temple? In India particularly, this is a strong argument. When they hear of the riches that are devoted to worshipping the deities, they say you could take those riches and distribute it to the poor, or you could feed the poor. Of course, what they don't mention are the millionaires or billionaires who are living in India, building 40, 50 skyscraper mansion as their personal residential home. Or the people who spend literally crores and crores of rupees on something like an IPL. But it's not a very sensible argument. Actually, Indian cricket. But the point is that there are so many people who have so much money who spend it for incorrect purposes. But if you worship the deities, then people acquire this mood of service. People acquire the mood of giving. And then you see how people actually give back to society, who are able to give Krishna prasadam, for example, to people in general. The temples in India were actually the source of distributing prasadam for people in general. In Vedic society, what actually makes money go around? Of course, you get capitalists in Vedic society. Those were the Vaishyas. They would earn big money. But Vaishyas were so Krishna conscious that they would liberally distribute charity. And therefore, you wouldn't have the difference that you have, like very wealthy people or very poor people in Vedic society. Now you have similar people who do take a lot of money. Some give back, but some don't. And people, think it's just the way it is. However, it's actually due to a lack of Krishna consciousness. If one understands that actually whatever problem there is, psychological or emotional deficiency or family-related issue, if one understands that the root cause of each of these problems, not in a broad way, not in just like a cliche type way, oh, this is because of a lack of Krishna consciousness. Oh, Kali Yuga is like this. Oh, the material world is like this. But in an actual way, being able to see, for example, if someone has an emotional deficiency in their heart, it just clearly being able to see that this is because they have a Krishna-shaped hole in their heart. And if they could satisfy themselves in a relationship with Krishna, then they wouldn't have these feelings of want they would now. There's a Christian psychologist, I've quoted this before, who has said that there are 7 essential needs of the human being. And she says that if originally these relationships, these needs are met in a relationship with the Lord, but failing that, you need it in this world. And failing that, if any one of these 7 needs are not met, you get some psychological deficiency. This is a Krishna-conscious understanding of psychology. And when you notice that people have this emotional vacancy in their heart, tracing it back in a systematic and deep, logical way to a lack of Krishna consciousness reflects realization. You will see this in every part of our life. And one who has this conviction, as so many Vaishnavas do, and our Acharyas did, that it's only Krishna that is missing here. And if Krishna is supplied, everything else will get filled in. One who has that perspective is actually following the path of pure bhakti. Continuing with Srila Prabhupada's purport. Prabhupada says, therefore, after reading Bhagavad Gita, one should promptly come to the conclusion of Bhagavad Gita. One should give up all other engagements, meaning not that one should give up all other engagements, one should give up faith in all other engagements. Of course, one may still be practically engaged in this world, but one should give up all other engagements and adopt the service of the Supreme Lord Krishna, the personality of Godhead. If one is convinced of this philosophy of life, that is faith. Now, Prabhupada is going to highlight 3 levels of entrance into pure bhakti. This is originally referenced in the Nectar of Devotion. Can I rub this board? So I'm going to use 3 terms, Kanishta, Madhyama, Uttama, not to refer to levels of devotees. What does the term Kanishta mean? Beginner. Madhyama means middle. Uttama means high. So these 3 terms can be used in any context. You can say he is an Uttama businessman, he is a Madhyama businessman, he is a Kanishta businessman. You can use it in any context. So here the terms Kanishta, Madhyama, and Uttama are used to refer to those people who have the Kanishta, Madhyama, and Uttama, the beginning, middle, and highest qualification to enter into the process of pure bhakti. This topic will be discussed again in Nectar of Devotion. It's important to mention it now. So the first level, now remember, we talk about knowledge of Krishna, right, as being the entrance to the surrender. So therefore, it is natural that this knowledge is seen as the cause for grading these different levels of people who enter into the path of pure bhakti. So you get someone who is the Kanishta entry, the Madhyama entry, and the Uttama entry. The Kanishta entry is the person who neither has strong knowledge nor strong faith. Has anybody heard this definition before? Comes in the Nectar of Devotion. That does not refer to the level of the devotee. This refers to the level of entry to become a devotee. So the example of this is when you had Srila Prabhupada who was preaching in 1966-67, you would have devotees who would come and listen to his class. And after listening to his class for a short time, or just by associating with Srila Prabhupada, they would get the feeling like, Prabhupada would just say, just chant Hare Krishna and stay high forever. or just give this one life to Krishna. And by that momentary association with Srila Prabhupada, they would just be completely convinced of this point. And they would give up everything, move into the temple and serve. Now their knowledge may not have been very deep. Their level of faith could perhaps be shaken. But they were practicing pure bhakti because they had that faith. They would go out onto the street and they would distribute stickers, or they would chant and dance, and they would just say, chant Hare Krishna and be happy. This is all you've got to do. And they would phrase it in different ways, but this is the essential message they would convey. And that is sufficient to be a pure devotee. Just having that faith. The Madhyama entry is someone who has strong faith. He has knowledge, but not sufficient to convince others. Insufficient to convince others. So the Madhyama devotee, for example, if he is confronted with someone who is very philosophical, very learned in different schools of thought, the Madhyama entry, himself will not, or herself may not be shaken. Whatever they hear, they will go back and seek clarification. They will not be taken away from that path. However, they may not have the knowledge to be able to convince others of that point of view. The Uttama entry is someone who has strong faith and has strong knowledge. An example is given of this, which is at the highest category of this level, and that's the 4 Kumaras. The Kanishta entry can, of course, if they were to go out onto the street and then they encounter some of their old association, then suddenly it can be like, oh, actually, this is what I want to do. And they can very easily slip away. The Madhyama entry will stay, but the Uttama entry will be able to not only hold their own, but really penetrate through that person's arguments and convince them, if not completely, but even intellectually, of that point of view. But you can see that all 3 are capable of entering into pure bhakti. And the thing that connects them is that faith. That simply by worshipping Krishna, everything can be achieved. And Prabhupada is going to speak about this. There's no specific example that's necessarily given, but we can think of so many devotees who have faith. For example, they may have worshipped Krishna for a very long time. They may have some knowledge so that they themselves are not moved. But how to give others this faith that Krishna is everything, that they may not be able to directly present the philosophy in that way.
Does it include people, for example, who may have, like Westerners, who may come along for the very first time, and you can see in them that they have very strong faith already. Sometimes, occasionally, I come across people like this. They just somehow picked up other people somewhere, read the Bible themselves before they went to the temple, or they've already started some practices at home before they even went to devotees. And they come along with a very strong sense of faith, but they don't have the knowledge yet.
Necessarily to back it up.
So is that
Yes.
an example?
Yes, it could be. And of course, it's not just like it's lines in the sand, it's a whole grade. So the grade, it's just like the level of knowledge and the level of faith. So it's almost like 2 tracks, like a train track that's going along. And you can get different devotees at different levels as you go up. But the highest level is understood, the lowest level is understood, of course, everyone falls somewhere along the spectrum.
And then just another question is about the level of knowledge.
Yes.
We've got faith as one thing, knowledge is the other. Does this refer to understanding, deep understanding of the Bhakti Sastris, or the Krishna Bhagavatam, or can it refer also to people who may not have studied deeply but have a very deep conviction, and by that deep conviction,
The knowledge refers to the understanding that Krishna is everything. in everything and he is everything. Now, they may not be able to present that necessarily according to Bhagavad Gita, but according to their own experience and realizations. But typically, in fact, in Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Leela, Srila Prabhupada defines a spiritual master as somebody who gives the disciple this understanding that Krishna is everything. Now, they may not phrase it in that way. If we reflect back on what we have heard from our teachers and mentors, they've usually given us this faith. They've said, actually, Krishna will take care of this, or you should see Krishna in this, or appreciate Krishna's potency in this. But that's the direction they always give us. That is the same thing as saying Krishna is everything, or Vasudeva Sarvamiti. So it is that specific knowledge that is being spoken about. And the faith that comes from that is, actually, I don't need to do anything apart from worshipping Krishna. Meaning their faith can be shaken easily, but they have that faith. Yes. So therefore, a pure devotee is not one who has no material desires. A pure devotee is one, or rather a more accurate way of phrasing that is, a person on the pure devotional path is one who has that faith. So therefore, the primary activity of someone who is on the path of pure bhakti is to protect that faith. Lord Chaitanya was asked this question, what is the principal duty of a Vaishnava? Or how is a Vaishnava to be recognized? Does anybody know the answer to this question? What was Lord Chaitanya's reply? No, there's another answer. What is the first characteristic of a Vaishnava? I think that was the question. Asat Sangatyaga e Vaishnavachar. They give up association which is asat, which is where the topic of conversation, where the consciousness is focused on the temporary, which is even focused on liberation. Because association with such individuals, it dilutes the intensity of this pure devotional faith, which is very rarely achieved actually. But if you know, there's another example that Lord Chaitanya gives of like a fence that is put around a devotional creeper. This was in teachings to Rupa Goswami. Yeah, so this was in his teachings to Rupa Goswami. And he explained that bhakti is like the seed of bhakti. You know how we sometimes say, Guru Krishna Kripa Paya Bhakti Lata Bija? The word bija means seed. So Bhakti Lata Bija means the seed of the creeper of devotional service. So when we say that Guru Krishna Kripa Paya, it means that by the mercy of Guru and Krishna, they give one that seed of faith, the faith of pure bhakti, and they implant it in our heart. Now, if we as devotees hear from different sources, some of which are not pure devotional sources, that seed becomes corrupted and it becomes mixed faith. Then the creeper that comes out is the creeper of mixed bhakti, to different levels of mixedness. But if that seed is protected very carefully, and the example Lord Chaitanya gives is to draw a fence around it, what that means is to keep everyone who is focused on the asat at a distance. This doesn't mean that we don't necessarily do our work. What it means is we don't allow our heart to be influenced by what they say or do. It also means that there's a strong watering of the seed. What was the watering compared to in this example? Hearing and chanting. Shravanadi, jal. I don't remember the exact phrase. But this jal, this water that waters that seed of pure bhakti, of faith in pure bhakti, is the process of pure hearing and chanting. We would hear from devotees who would deepen this knowledge that Krishna is everything, and that worshipping Krishna is everything that we need to do. Now, it's also important to know that hearing doesn't mean just hearing means transformation. where we are taking those instructions and imbibing it in our heart. It doesn't mean just hearing through one ear and going out the other ear necessarily. Of course, that's also good. But watering of the seed really requires a conscious imbibing of these instructions and these impressions into our heart. And this hearing actually is best done if one is following a single devotee. If you are hearing from, in our case, Srila Prabhupada and our spiritual master, and or any other mentor that our spiritual master has recommended to us, hearing from them and cultivating our mood of service according to the instructions received from that devotee is the practice of proper hearing and chanting. Usually when we attend Bhagavatam class, even if we attend daily, there are many devotees, and of course we hear different instructions. It's very hard, even if all those devotees are wonderful, and they are, very hard for us to implement all those instructions. They come from very different angles of vision. But we need one devotee whose instructions we are following, and everything else we hear, it allows us, we should be taking it from the perspective of that one devotee we are following. And if we are confused about any conflicting instructions, we need to go back to that one devotee and clarify. These are different instructions. What do you want me to do or follow? That is proper hearing and chanting. So for those of us who don't yet have a spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada forms that main shiksha. And throughout our life, Srila Prabhupada is our main shiksha. And our spiritual master will give us a particular mood of following Srila Prabhupada's instructions. When that seed of bhakti is thus watered, the seed of faith is thus watered, the creeper of bhakti sprouts with 2 leaves. And the 2 leaves refer to kleshagni and shubhada, the removal of all inauspicious items in our life and the arising of auspiciousness. As the creeper continues to grow, it eventually takes us right from the very beginning of bhakti, from Shraddha, that beginning faith. So in those 9 processes of bhakti, Shraddha actually means faith according to pure devotional principles. It doesn't mean just faith in partial faith, coming to the temple, something like that. The whole process, our process from beginning through to end, is the process of pure bhakti. We sometimes say, one day I will become a pure devotee. Even if we have, what devotees usually mean by that is, one day I will serve Krishna without material desires. Typically that's what devotees mean to say. But from the point of view of the connotation it has, it sometimes leads us to feel like it's okay if I have material desires, and it's okay if I fulfill them, because I'm not yet a pure devotee. Now that second implication is not desirable. What is more important is to understand that I'm following the path of pure bhakti right from the beginning through to end. And if I'm trying to follow the path of pure bhakti and I'm following that goal of reaching pure devotional service completely free of material desires, above the modes of material nature, I'm on the path of pure bhakti, and Krishna sees me, sees a devotee who's practicing this as being a pure devotee. So what it means is that we understand I may have other desires and other tendencies, but Krishna, I want to come to this. And it becomes, Krishna, please help me. I'm right now here, and you set some level of consistency. But then acknowledging that this is the high standard that we want to follow, we bring ourselves to this standard through association, through hearing, etc. Where we start to make a philosophy to justify our position, that means we have locked ourselves away from the path of pure bhakti. If we start to feel like it is okay to feel what I do, in the sense that, I need this outside of devotional service. I need these things, and those who don't have it are, a little bit fanatical. And I don't want to be fanatical like them. I want to be more balanced in my life. that is mixed devotee. And hearing from mixed devotees produces the seed of mixed bhakti in one's heart. So it is really important, and this knowledge of the 7th chapter, conveyed purely, is the standard by which we judge the quality of the instructions we hear. And when we hear from proper devotees, that's the level at which we will get instructions. Are there any questions about this so far? So let's go back to chapter 7. If you read that the remainder of the purport to text 9, Prabhupada spends the rest of that time talking about these 3 levels of entry devotees.
So, knowledge culminates in understanding that Krishna is everything.
Well, knowledge is that Krishna is everything, which culminates in the realization that I don't need to do anything else apart from worshipping Krishna.
And is there a similar term that you would put for faith?
That is the faith.
Divine faith. Is faith the same as Krishna? So knowledge and faith, is the aspect of God.
Yes.
Faith that Krishna is everything and worship.
Well, faith that I don't need to do anything except for worshipping Krishna. So knowledge is Krishna is everything. Faith is I don't need to do anything else.
I understand it's better like Krishna is everything, but it's hard for me to basically understand, from sound it comes ether, from ether it's, I don't know, it's just me, but to visualize or understand a record, I understand partially, like from touch to air and then from air to form, but it's more of like words rather than I can say I actually understand it.
It is not necessary to understand the details of how it works. It's enough if one understands the principle. One can actually go into an elemental break. See, the way we study chemistry or physics, it's very atheistic. It's just focused on natural phenomenon as being the cause for everything. But this particular breakdown is very theistic because it is again an elemental breakdown of what happens. And if one deeply studies it, I don't understand the subject fully myself, but if one deeply studies it, well, first, for example, we say that there are, how many elements are there in the periodic table? 112? 119? I've forgotten. More than 108 for sure. How many elements there are in the periodic table? Well, the Bhagavad Gita says there are 5 elements that make up everything else. Earth, water, fire, ether. All the gross elements that make up everything else. Well, how do we understand that the 108 elements, how do we reconcile it with the 5 elements of the Bhagavad Gita? My understanding from what I've heard is that these 5 elements refer to a more subtle form of energy. It's not, like for example, sometimes we say the fire digestion, but that's hydrochloric acid. There's no fire as we identify as being fire, but it has the element of heat. Or we sometimes say the prana is moving through the body. We say the airs are moving, the life airs are moving. So it refers to a more subtle categorization of the elements and structures and functions of different combinations of elements. So there is a deeper understanding of these elements at a subtler level and how they connect to sound. Even sound, for example, we connect sound to being the verbal manifestation of sound. Actually, there are 4 levels of sound that are described in the Upanishads. You have the voice, which is sound, but then before something is enunciated as voice, there is something which is enunciated in the mind as being a mental picture. That mental verbalization of what we want to say is also called sound. So sometimes Prabhupada would, comment on those who follow Mauna Vrat, like who don't say anything. They would say that they think by not speaking, they're not saying anything, but actually their mind is very active. And they're speaking through their mind. So that's another form of speaking. Before it gets to the mind, a more subtle level is in the intelligence, where there's an initial, not just like a mental visualization of what we're going to say, but an intellectual direction of the idea that we want to communicate. And that's also considered sound. But and this comes from different levels of chakras, Manipuraka, Anahata, etc. These levels of sound originate from these different chakras. And then the deepest level of sound is Omkara. So therefore, when Krishna says, I am the original sound of the Vedas, I am the original sound, we sometimes say that the whole world is created from sound. Or we say the whole world is created from Om. And that's what it means. That Om is that original form of sound which creates other vibrations which are capable of manipulating matter, for example. So each of these elements, and this detail comes out in some of the texts of the Upanishads, and those who have studied these elements in deep detail can actually, there's a lot of subtlety, and can point out how one element actually comes from another. I only have a very superficial understanding of this subject, but the principle behind it is that Krishna is that ability that sits behind everything. Any other questions? Okay. So last week we stopped off at text, was it 12? So here Krishna says, know that all states of being, be they goodness, passion or ignorance, are manifested by my energy. I am in one sense everything. So that's like a summary of what Krishna wants to say. I am everything, but I am also independent. So that was, we discussed, there was jnana and vijnana. So if you remember, in text 2, Krishna's in the 7th chapter, Krishna said, I'm going to teach you jnanam teham sa vijnanam. I'm going to teach you knowledge and vijnana. So jnana here referred to Krishna's presence in everything. Vijnana refers to how Krishna is separate from everything. So here Krishna is briefly providing vijnana that will be elaborated on in the 9th chapter. I am in one sense everything, but I am independent. I am not under the modes of material nature, for they, on the contrary, are within me. And then text 13 onwards for 3 verses, Krishna is going to speak about how and why people don't know him. Because knowledge of Krishna is the cause of taking shelter of him. Why people don't achieve knowledge of Krishna, even if they are learned, is the topic of these 3 verses. Text 13. Tribir gunamayir bhaver ebi sarvam idam jagat mohitam na bijanati mamebhya paramavyayam. Translation.
Even by the 3 modes of goodness, passion and ignorance, the whole world does not know me, who am above the most and inexhaustible.
Knowledge of Krishna is actually beyond the 3 modes of material nature. And realization of Krishna as he is takes one completely above the modes of nature. So as long as I am thinking from my perspective as a conditioned soul, I will never actually understand Krishna. So how do we, who are under the modes of nature, come to understand Krishna? How is that possible? Because we are saying that it is knowledge of Krishna that provides that faith. But I myself am always going to be under the 3 modes. And this verse says that if I'm under the 3 modes, I can't understand Krishna. Because I'm limited in my perspective. In the mode of goodness, I may understand Krishna as an impersonal Brahman. In the mode of passion, I may understand him as a moralistic or a good man. Or I may feel for some of those actions which I feel are not moral. The mode of ignorance, I hardly know whether what Krishna is. I think it's just an ordinary man, huh? Sorry?
By hearing.
From?
By hearing the source that is outside
Yes.
the nature.
Exactly. So it's almost like we are borrowing our spiritual master's consciousness. When we replace our intelligence and when we learn to mold our heart according to our spiritual master's instructions, whose level of consciousness is above the 3 modes of nature, then we are able to acquire knowledge of Krishna. And if we consistently cultivate that knowledge, we are able to acquire that knowledge. But those who basically do not seek instruction from someone above the modes, who retain stubbornly or unconsciously, retain their own point of view. No, it is like this. This is what I understand. I will take something of what you say, but there's something I want to keep of my own understanding. One who retains that point of view cannot actually come to understand Krishna fully. And Krishna will express this point in verse 14. Daivihi esha gunamayi mama maya duratyaya mameva ye prapadyante maya metam tarantite. Translation.
This divine energy of mind, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is difficult to overcome. But those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it.
You know, it's actually really interesting. The living entity by nature is actually always dependent. We think, we are in a particular phase of life, and I think I'm independent. What I think I'm saying is that I'm rejecting other people's point of view and I'm forming my own point of view. But all I'm doing is accepting and rejecting something based on the state of my own mind. I'm completely driven by my own intelligence. If I try and get above my way of thinking and I hold on to, another person's form of thinking who may be in a higher mode of nature. So I'm lazing around the house and I'm inactive. And then I feel inspired by someone who's, very passionate and ambitious. And then I start to act according to what they are doing. Have I left the modes of nature? Not really. I've transitioned from one to another. Or if I'm influenced by someone's peaceful style of life, again, I'm acting within someone else's level of the modes of nature. Until and unless one surrenders to Krishna or his devotee, who are completely above the modes of nature, not just some moral person, not just some good person, not just a whole brand of opinions. Mayam etam tarantite. Mam eva ye. The word eva in the third line is important. Eva means only, certainly. It puts a very strong sense of definitiveness. Mam eva, only me, or my devotees, those connected to me only. Mam eva ye prapadyante. Only those who surrender unto me can actually overcome my Maya. This verse also explains why every kind of spiritual practitioner, no matter what brand of spirituality they may subscribe to, they have to seek mercy from Krishna to leave Maya. Because it is Krishna's energy. It is not anyone else's energy. Only by seeking Krishna's grace and acquiring Krishna's grace can they ever circumvent Maya. Those who speak of, for example, Hatha Yoga practices and awakening the Kundalini energy and unifying the Shiva and Parvati in terms of energies of the nape of one's neck are completely deluded. Those who speak about achieving different states of consciousness by abstract forms of meditation or meditating on nothing or the space between two thoughts are completely deluded. All they're doing is maybe going from one strand of the mode of nature to another strand and then back again. They can never leave Maya. It's Krishna's energy. It's no one else's energy. It obeys only Krishna's will.
I agree with you. I'm just saying I've been in a Kundalini class and you see people rolling around on the floor, really Kundalini is rising. It looks really affected. It looks full on. Do they really believe this? I don't know. They really believe it. What do you think? That's what Prabhupada used to call sort of a sentimentality or speculation because they really believe that this is happening.
It's also a sense of being unfortunate because I've read because when I was researching yoga, particularly those who come from the Shivananda school of yoga, like up north of India, particularly they focus on certain Hatha Yoga Pradipika and those texts. And in those texts, it's mentioned that practice of this asana leads to particular unification of energies and leads to this result. And these teachers and instructors, they speak about an asana in those, very, flowery terms. Doing this, the great sages of India have done this, and this is the realization they've achieved. It's misguided, really. In the 6th verse of Bhagavatam, it is said, Manda sumanda matayo manda bhagya upadrita, that even if someone who's inclined for spiritual life approaches somebody, this is one of the qualities mentioned among the others. Most people are not inclined. If they are inclined, they go to somebody, they're largely misguided. And above all, even if they're guided properly, our lives are so disturbed, that verse says, if we're not able to follow those instructions.
Can you link to prior words, for example, say someone's compassionate and they be attracted by peaceful therapy who gives them instructions to help them to know goodness? Can that help facilitate them or prepare them for hearing transmitting?
There are two ways to answer this question. That kind of training may be favorable, it may also be a deterrent. Like, for example, if someone comes from a particular background, they may come to the temple, oh, the devotees are so passionate. Oh, Prabhupada says, gets angry. He uses the word rascal in class. He can't be a sadhu. And they go. The real thing that actually causes bhakti is agyata sukriti, unknown devotional service. So in the second verse of Srimad Bhagavatam, it says that one who has the piety, they will be able to appreciate this message. And what that piety means is that, when devotees go out onto the street, they distribute books or they chant Krishna's names. Through whatever level of, piety that people have, usually easier for people who are a little bit more pious, but not necessarily. They may say, oh, these people are peaceful. They're distributing something which is a nice message in this very passionate and self-oriented world. That one appreciation of a pure devotee, or of devotees who are acting under pure devotees' guidance, is sufficient. And that will be the only cause that inspires them into bhakti. Because you can have someone who's even the biggest of ruffians externally, but if their heart has a little bit of attraction for Krishna, in contact with Krishna consciousness, that outpouring of devotion will come out. But someone can have the best of character, be cultivated in the best of environments, but have never come in contact with a devotee before. And it is much harder for them to acquire Krishna. But the reason it can be helpful is if someone is naturally in the mode of goodness, they tend to be very soft-spoken, they tend to be very peaceful, they tend to have some level of service. An example of this is King Riga. So King Riga was a very charitable person. And when a Vaishnava came, he used to give charity to everybody. When a Vaishnava came to him, he said, can I get some money to build a temple? It's like, Prabhupada would go and say, can I get a donation for my Bhagavatam? And this king was very charitable anyway. Like that Hanuman, what is his name? That gave Prabhupada the donation for, was it the first or second volume of the first canto? Don't remember. He was a very pious man, and he would give donations to people. So like this, someone had approached King Riga, and King Riga was like, yes, you want, how much ever you want, you take. And that Vaishnava was so pleased. And he was obviously a very great soul, because he said, thank you, and may you have darshan of Krishna. With that benediction, he left. So that King Riga's piety helped. But sometimes piety can be a detriment also. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur Madhuri Kadambini describes that one of the obstacles to devotional service can be obstacles that come from having a pious life. One is accustomed to, for example, living in isolation. One doesn't like crowds. So if there's a roaring kirtan going on, one feels, ooh, this is too sticky, this is too yucky, this is too, the devotees, they're so loud. But okay, that element may be there, but a devotee would say they're chanting Krishna's names with so much enthusiasm. And that was Prabhupada's perspective. Yes, of course, there's a certain element of practicality. So you put earplugs or something. Or devotees, over time, they naturally mature as they develop tinnitus or something. They naturally mature. But the point is they're chanting with affection for Krishna's names. And often that point can be missed if someone has an over-emphasis on piety. And that is the problem. So text 15. So this finishes the sequence of 3 verses that describe why people don't surrender to Krishna. In this verse, there are 4 types of people who are referenced who have read Shastra. Having read Shastra, they have not been able to acquire the knowledge that Krishna is everything. And these are the 4 categories. Namam dushkriti no mudha prapadyante naradhama mayaya paritaghyana asuram bhavam ashritaha. Translation.
All the beings who are crossing through this, who are lowest among mankind, whose knowledge is formed by illusion, and who partake of their sickness, do not surrender.
So again, the theme of surrender is what is continuing throughout this chapter. So Namam, so Arjuna is asking 2 verses prior to this, if this is the knowledge of you, this is what is the truth, why do people not surrender? And Krishna begins that topic by saying, those who are deluded by the modes of nature cannot. Those who cross the modes of nature can. Now here are examples of 4 people who do not cross the modes of nature, who stick within their own manner of thinking, even if they've read the scriptures. They read the scriptures and they retain their own point of view. They stubbornly resist the instructions of the devotees. They are called dushkritina. The word dushkritina, for want of a better word, Prabhupada translates it as being miscreant. Kritina means one who performs activity. Dushkritina means one who doesn't perform any activity that is useful. But they're called dushkritina because their activities cause disturbances in society. So there are 4 kinds of miscreants. Sometimes Prabhupada would also say 4 kinds of rascals. And the first category is mudha. Mudha here means the foolish. Here's Prabhupada's description of the mudha. The mudhas are those who are grossly foolish, like hard-working beasts of burden. They want to enjoy the fruits of their labor by themselves and so do not want to part with them for the supreme. The typical example of the beast of burden is the ass. This humble beast is made to work very hard by his master. The ass does not really know for whom he works so hard day and night. He remains satisfied by filling his stomach with a bundle of grass, sleeping for a while under fear of being beaten by his master, and satisfying his sex appetite at the risk of being repeatedly kicked by the opposite party, either physically in the case of a donkey or metaphorically. The ass sings poetry and philosophy sometimes, but his braying sound only disturbs others. This is the position of the foolish fruitive worker who does not know for whom he should work. He does not know that karma is meant for yajna, or for the pleasure of Vishnu. So, Prabhupada's description of the mudha is the person who has no time for Krishna consciousness. Their entire day is in working so hard to just acquire a better facility to experience this world. Now, these people in Vedic culture would read the Shastras and would focus on the Karma Kanda section of the Vedas. They think that karma is for enjoyment, and that's the indication Prabhupada gives in the last line. They do not know that karma is meant for yajna, or for the worship of Vishnu. They think that these activities are meant to acquire a superior status of happiness. And Prabhupada here earlier says, that the ass sings poetry and philosophy sometimes, but this braying sound only disturbs others. So like an example of this is given in the 2nd chapter. If you go to verse 42 and 43. 2, 42, 43. So these are the verses that describe the Veda Vada Ratas, or the apparent followers of the Vedas. So here is the translation. Men of small knowledge are very much attached to the flowery words of the Vedas, which recommend various fruitive activities for elevation to the heavenly planets, result in good birth, power, and so forth. Being desirous of sense gratification and opulent life, they say there is nothing more than this. Nanyad astiti. So it comes up in verse 42, the 4th line. Na anyad asti. There is nothing else other than this. That is their opinion. Yeah, you should worship, you should do this. I don't have time. I'm focused on something else. Actually, the class of worshippers mentioned here are superior to the majority of people who actually enact the same philosophy nowadays. Most people, but I need to work hard, I need to go, I need to endeavor, I need to achieve this. Just working like a beast of burden, Prabhupada says, working like an ass. Now here's how the Naradhama, Nara means human being, Adhama means lowest. Nara Uttama means highest among human beings. Nara Adhama means lowest among human beings. So here is how Srila Prabhupada describes the Naradhama. Back to 715. By the way, these purports by Srila Prabhupada are really, really sweet. And I think this is one of the longer purports that Srila Prabhupada offers, 715. So here is Srila Prabhupada's description of the Naradhama. Another class of dushkriti or miscreant is called the Naradhama, or lowest of mankind. Nara means human being and Adhama means the lowest. Out of 8,400,000 species of living beings, there are 400,000 human beings. Out of these numerous lower forms of human life, out of these, there are numerous lower forms of human life that are mostly uncivilized. The civilized human beings are those who have regulative principles of social, political, and religious life. Those who are socially and politically developed, but who have no religious principles, must be considered Naradhama. So Prabhupada is saying, and typically these would be people who come from an educated and cultured background. In Vedic culture, these are people who come from high-class families, like Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, families who worship Krishna and who know better. But these individuals, they reject the devotional part of their family's culture. And instead, they accept the cultural elements of what their family does. They feel a very strong sense, of moral righteousness. They feel like certain social structures are important, and they need, for example, they may set up philosophical societies to debate things. So that sense of, higher thoughts and cultivation is there, but it is devoid of Krishna. For one who comes, despite having culture, to a state of rejecting Krishna consciousness. Here, the rejection of Krishna consciousness is not just because of material desires. Here, there's an intellectual rejection of Krishna consciousness. Therefore, they are still more fallen and still more unfortunate. Now, here is how the Maya Aparita Jnana is described. The jnana means here knowledge. It's not knowledge of Krishna, it's any kind of knowledge. Aparita means taken away. Maya means by Maya. So in Prabhupada's purport 323, he's going to describe the Maya Aparita Jnana. So one who are knowledgeable, but whose knowledge has been stolen away. So he says, the next class of dushkriti is called Maya Aparita Jnana, or those persons whose erudite knowledge has been nullified by the influence of illusory energy. They're mostly very learned fellows, great philosophers, poets, literati, scientists, etc., but illusory energy misguides them, and therefore they disobey the Supreme Lord. Now, the specific background behind the Maya Aparita Jnana is that they tend to be spiritual philosophers. They will study Sankhya, they will study yoga, they will study the Vedanta Sutras, and they will draw spiritual philosophical meanings from them. But whatever they practice, they don't come to the conclusion that Krishna is everything. They come to a philosophy of life that falls short of Krishna. They are, in some sense, worse off than the Naradamas, because the Naradamas are still within the material sphere of life. The Maya Aparita Jnanas have at least felt like there's something more to life than just dealing with material social circles. However, even though they may be practicing some form of spiritual life, their knowledge has been taken away. They don't understand the real purpose of Sankhya is to find the spirit soul and Krishna as a super soul. They think that ultimately Sankhya must mean some material elements, which are the cause for everything else in this world. Or they think, like Karma Mimamsas do, that's a little bit different. They have some philosophy which stops short of Krishna, some spiritual type of philosophy. So they've accepted spiritual life in some way, but they have not come to Krishna. And so Prabhupada gives the example of scientists because the acharyas give the example of those following Sankhya. Scientists have a similar breakdown of the material world. Of course, they do it to dominate material nature. So in that sense, from a consciousness perspective, they're probably worse off than the Sankhyites. But the attitude is similar. They analyze the material world. They feel like there's something more than just material and philosophical circles. There's a search for the truth of life, but they don't come to Krishna. Such people tend to be more dangerous because they are usually very intelligent. They're usually very articulate and very convincing. And the majority of our society are confused by such terms spoken of by academics and the textbooks written based on what they have found. So in that sense, they're worse off because it's much harder to convince them. They're intellectually convinced of their point of view. One has no time. The other one has intellectually rejected Krishna consciousness. The third is intellectually convinced of their own point of view. Harder to convince them. Now here's how Srila Prabhupada describes the Asura Bhava. He says, the last class of Dushkriti is called Asuram Bhava Mashrita, or those of demonic principles. This class is openly atheistic. Some of them argue that the Supreme Lord can never descend upon this material world, but they are unable to give any tangible reasons as to why not. There are others who make him subordinate to the impersonal feature, although the opposite is declared in the Gita. Envious of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the atheist will present a number of illicit incarnations manufactured in the factory of his brain. Such persons whose very principle of life is to decry the personality of Godhead cannot surrender unto the lotus feet of Sri Krishna. So this is the fourth and the worst of the four categories. This is Asuram Bhavam, those who have the mood of the Asuras. The mood of the Asuras is to tear Krishna apart. They want to hurt Krishna. There is an active envy towards Krishna. Here it's not just intellectual. Here it is a problem of the heart. So those who are envious of Krishna, including decrying him a form, who say that no, Krishna cannot have a form, that sense of envy towards Krishna, where they through their logical argument, they present Krishna as not having a form. As much as Asuras want to pierce Krishna, our acharyas say, using weapons, they pierce Krishna's form using the arrows of their logic, because it's not Krishna who's hurt, but they want that the inclinations are the same. So therefore they are considered to have the mood of the Asuras, and they are the worst of the lot. because that feeling of envy is very hard to retrain. Those who are innocently convinced of the impersonalistic point of view are not exactly in this category. These 4 categories are people who have usually studied scriptures, who have come across those scriptures that speak about Krishna in some way. But at different levels, they reject Krishna, either because they're attracted to material enjoyment, or they're attracted to a form of civilization devoid of Krishna, or they're attracted to some form of spiritual practice devoid of Krishna, or they decide that if they're attracted to some form of spiritual life, specifically Krishna cannot have a form. These 4 categories are people who would generally never surrender to Krishna. So Prabhupada in the end says, Sri Yamunacharya Alabandaru of South India said, "O my Lord, you are unknowable to persons involved with atheistic principles. And all these principles are actually atheistic. The reason is that they see something separate from Krishna. Any vision which sees anything or anyone as being separate from Krishna implicitly acknowledges that there is something outside of Krishna's control, something outside of Krishna's purview. And that thinking is atheistic. If I feel that, why is Krishna allowing this to happen to me? And that's very natural. But one should know that one at that point is seeing things separate from Krishna's will, desire. And one has desires separate from Krishna that one is feeling frustrated about. But atheism can either happen in a gross form, when one openly rejects Krishna, or even to different levels of subtlety, where one feels, there's something I still need to do that is a little bit separate from Krishna. But all of these 4 forms are atheistic because they involve rejection of Krishna in major categories, in major levels. How do atheists become Krishna conscious? By being touched by the mercy of a devotee. If they are with a devotee, it can happen in the funniest of ways. But there was a person who didn't like the devotees at all, and he would abuse the devotees and he would yell at them. Finally, there was one devotee inside the temple, and he was like really a strong guy, and he couldn't take this anymore. He just went and said, "You and me right now," and he actually started fighting with him. He bashed him black and blue. Terrific fight. He bashed him black and blue, and then he left him. And then the next day, this man, with bruised eyes, and then he came to the temple. He was like, where is that person? He was a really good fighter. I was thinking that Hare Krishnas were useless people. They didn't do anything like practical, but this guy, he really knows his stuff. I want to learn from him. What does he do? What is he involved in? This is where he gets his strength from. It can happen in really, really funny ways. But the principle is to be touched by a devotee. However, wherever, whatever happens, but to be touched by a devotee. Yes. But that was also innocence. There's a difference between a sense of envy and just innocently not knowing any better. So in that sense, it's not really exactly atheistic. It's just more like... Or there are experiences that make one feel like if this is religion, I don't want it. And many people call themselves atheists from that point of view also. So if someone says, I'm an atheist, Ganesham Prabhu's response in book distribution is, so am I. But this is good for you. Because you don't have to take their words. You don't have to respect. They don't even know what that means most of the time. I'm an atheist. What? You just stop? I mean, there's a saying actually, there are no atheists in foxholes. You heard that one? Oh, yeah. You know what a foxhole is? It's a trench, like in a war trench. And when you are there, you can be bombed and killed at any time. So in that vulnerable position where your life is, just touch and go, there are no atheists there.
Yeah. It's also saying there are no atheists in space.
Whenever there's a time, it comes to a crisis, it is the most natural instinct. Anybody, please help me. Yeah, but again, never judge a book by its cover. You're right. What an actual atheist is someone who feels envious of Krishna. That's the heart of what that person is.
By envy of Krishna, that's what everybody says. We can't be envious of Krishna. We are here because we're envious of Krishna. I'm not envious of Krishna. Why do people say
We'll describe that after the class. But the fact that we want to keep ourselves separate, it's like saying, if suppose somebody tells me, drink water, it's good for you. No, I don't think so. I think, water is not that good for you. I can tell you 10 problems with drinking water. This is like stubbornness despite ourselves. It's like there's a saying, to cut one's nose to spite one's face. Has anyone heard that before? Yes. But it's like, I'm not going to do what you say just because you told me. That sense of not wanting to listen to instructions, even if it is good for oneself. That's where it comes through. Holding oneself independence. Any sense of independence is a manifestation of atheism. Any sense of not acknowledging Krishna's presence in our life. That I didn't come up with my intelligence. I didn't come up with, this, whatever I've achieved, it's because of gifts I have got. Someone who is not willing to acknowledge those gifts, it's my thing. Who else is going to take credit for what I've done? That is actually because of envy. So now, yeah, he would fall in. He would. I cannot specifically comment on Ravana's consciousness. He was a scholar of the Vedas. He, very, very great Pandit, very, very learned individual, but he was very envious of Krishna. So yes, he would be in the category of Asuram Bhavam. Very, very envious. What if somebody else has something and he doesn't have it? If somebody else is enjoying something that he didn't have, he would try and take it away. He saw himself as being, basically the Supreme Lord. And he thought that everything was actually meant for him. And anyone and anything who was in competition with that feeling, he very strongly reacted to it. He saw Mother Sita, here's a beautiful lady. What are you doing with a beggar in the forest? Your place is with me. Come to me. That was his mentality. So Asuram Bhavam Ashrita, very envious. Text 16. Now this verse, from now to text 19, it will describe different classes of mixed devotees and pure devotees. So this, Arjuna asks the question, okay, you've described those who don't surrender to you. What about those who do surrender to you? Krishna says, Chaturvida bhajante mam jana sukriti no jana artho jigyasur jnani cha bharatarshava. Translation.
O best among Bharatas, all kinds of pious men begin to render devotional service unto you. The distressed, the desire of wealth, you give and you accept it in knowledge of the Lord.
So there are 4 categories mentioned here. Artha, which is the person who's distressed. Here, then, it is Jigyasur, inquisitive. Artha Arthi, one who wants material riches. Now I'll come to the 4th category shortly. All of these 3 categories are devotees. So they have taken shelter of Krishna and devotional service in a major way. They are in a relationship with Krishna. So do you remember that categorization, my grandfather with this side just as PhD students and this side with family? They are on the side of family. However, they come with their specific desires. They're called Karma Mishra Bhaktas. What this means is that these individuals, they worship Krishna, but they still strongly, not strong, well, to a certain degree, they maintain their material desires. It's not like they don't necessarily feel that their material desires need to be changed. They maintain them, they facilitate them. It's not like those who are on the path of pure bhakti who understand that this is the standard of pure bhakti. To serve Krishna completely free of any other desire. Let me just worship Krishna. So the one who's distressed, he worships Krishna and a part of him desires freedom from suffering. This guy wants some material gain. The example here is who? Dhruva Maharaj. He's in the highest category of this type of devotee. Wants material riches, wants material gain. One who's distressed is who? Gajendra. That's the typical example given here. Now the one who's inquisitive, it seems like, he's inquisitive about spiritual life. Why is he categorized as being, devotee with, some material hankering? The reason is, the background behind any kind of questioning is either the wanting for material gain or the desire to remove suffering. This is all pretty much virtually all inquiries can be put into these two categories. So because it is a longer form of wanting either removal of distress or wanting gain. They may not directly ask Krishna for gain, but they're seeing a longer term solution to the same problems. They're considered also to be Karma Mishra Bhaktas. Our acharyas say, sometimes in the way verses are given, there's a categorization. Like in the previous verse, there was a clear gradation of mudas being, unfortunate, but then better off than naradamas, who are better off than maya paritagyanas, who are better off than asuras. So in that sense, there's a gradation. So our acharyas say the gradation, there's a sense that it reflects an order. Sometimes the verses don't give an order because of either confusion by the devotee who's speaking, if the devotee is expressing confusion, or out of ecstasy, it is not given. But usually when the order is there, one can ask the question, why is that order given? In this situation, the jigyasu or acharya say is given between these two categories because both these categories are encouraged to solve their material desires or relieve their problems by inquiring. So because this category is an inspiration for both these two individuals, he's placed in the middle. Now, the example for the one who's inquisitive is Shaunaka Rishi. So if you remember Shaunaka Rishi in the Srimad Bhagavatam, he was asking, here are the problems with Kali Yuga. How do we solve them? It is very, very rare that a devotee will come and say, teach me how to love Krishna. That's not generally how devotees come. Now, devotees can come in these levels. It doesn't mean they have to stay there. But this happens when they come to the association of devotees and they hear, pure Krishna consciousness. They give up their previous conceptions and come to a state of understanding that actually, if I just worship Krishna, everything else is solved. But these individuals, either they don't get to hear such pure instructions, or they don't fully imbibe it in their heart. So they are still called mixed devotees. Remember in the first class in this chapter, we described how these devotees, they go to Swarga, enjoy for a very long time, and they don't come back down. Rather, they go and achieve the other 4 kinds of liberation: Salokya, Samipya, Shashti, and Sarupya. Same form, same planet, same level of opulence, or some level of closeness, depending on the intensity of their desire. And they worship Krishna in that way. However, they don't achieve the result of pure bhakti, which is that eternal relationship with Krishna. Now the jnani, which is the 4th category in this verse, this has 2 meanings, and different acharyas give different explanations. One is the Bhagavad Jnani, so one who knows that Krishna is everything. So this jnani is the pure devotee. Now Prabhupada's explanation doesn't refer to this understanding. It refers to somebody who's a Jnana Mishra Bhakta. The Jnana Mishra Bhakta is one who has 0 material desire, but they retain some level of connection to practices like, austerities, or they like seclusion. There's some hint of having something separate from their relationship with Krishna. The Jnana Mishra Bhakta achieves Shantaras, but does not achieve Dasya, Vatsalya, Madhurya, or Sakya. Shantaras, neutrality more specifically. The Bhagavad Jnani, understanding of the Jnani, here is the great soul who actually achieves pure bhakti, who is practicing pure bhakti, and he is the one who achieves the 4 rasas. Now both these explanations of the jnani are possible. The explanation that is important from a conceptual point of view of understanding this chapter is this explanation. Yes, very much. All of these people are in a complete relationship with Krishna. They are far, far superior to any of the other kinds of yogis in the first 6 chapters. However, they still retain a part of their own conception. So in that sense, they have not fully surrendered to Krishna. You know that verse in the Bhagavatam? Whether one has material desire, desires for liberation, or desire for devotional service, still one should fully engage in the 9 processes of bhakti to accomplish his desires. You know that verse? Akama sarva kama va moksha kama udharati tivrena bhakti yogena yajeta purushampara. So the verse is tivrena bhaktina. So tivra bhakti means only the 9 processes of bhakti, because that's intense bhakti. Other forms of bhakti, like doing one's own duty and offering that to Krishna, is not intense. It's a form of bhakti, but it's not intense bhakti. It comes in Srimad Bhagavatam, 2nd canto. Someone can pull up the reference on Vedabase or something. It's been shared with the class. Remind me after the class, we can talk about the reference. Now here is text 17. Tesham jnani nitya yukta eka bhaktir vishishyate priyo hi jnani no tyartam aham sacha mama priyaha. Translation.
Of these, the one who is in full knowledge and who is always engaged in pure devotional service is the best. But I am very dear to him and he is dear to me.
So here is the description of the jnani who is the Bhagavad Jnani, who has complete knowledge of Krishna, who has surrendered to Krishna. So he says, out of them all, Tesham Jnani Nitya Yukta. He is always engaged in my service. Eka bhaktir vishishyate. He is only in my devotional service with the desire to please me. Priya hi jnanino atyartam. This person is specifically very dear to me. Every one of these devotees are dear to me, but this devotee is specifically dear to me. Aham sacha mama priya. And I also am very, very dear to him. For the others, I'm also dear to them, but they have something else apart from myself. But for this devotee, I'm the only person in his life, and he's the only person for me. In the prayers in the instructions to Durvasa Muni, in the Ambarish Maharaj pastime, Krishna says the same thing. He says that my devotees, I am everything, and for me, my devotees are everything. What is that verse in the glorification of the Vaishnavas? Tumhara ridhoye sada Govinda Vishram, Govinda kohena mora. Govinda kohena mora. How does that verse end? Phrase end? Govinda kohena mora bhaktera prana something. So what the verse says, that in the heart of the devotee resides Govinda eternally. Tumhara ridhoye sada Govinda Vishram. In your heart, Govinda is eternally resident. Govinda kohena mora amara prana something, which means that Govinda himself says, the devotees are my very life. So Prabhupada writes in the purport, free from all contaminations of material desires, the distressed, the inquisitive, the penniless, and the seeker after supreme knowledge, so that's the translation of Jnani, as the Jnana Mishra Bhakta, can all become pure devotees, but out of them, he who is in knowledge of the absolute truth and free from all material desires becomes a really pure devotee of the Lord. And of the four orders, the devotee who is in full knowledge and is at the same time engaged in devotional service, the Lord says is best. By searching after knowledge, one realizes that his self is different from his material body. And when further advanced, he comes to the knowledge of impersonal Brahman and Paramatma. When he is fully purified, he realizes that his constitutional position is to be an eternal servant of God. So by association with pure devotees, the inquisitive, distressed, the seeker after material amelioration, and the man in knowledge all become themselves pure. But in the preparatory stage, the man who is in full knowledge of the Supreme Lord and is at the same time executing devotional service is very dear to the Lord. He who is situated in pure knowledge of the transcendence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is so protected in devotional service that material contamination cannot touch him. Text 18. Udhara sarva evaite jnani tva atmaiva me matam asita sahi yuktatma mameva gatim. Translation.
All these devotees are undoubtedly magnanimous souls, but he who is situated in knowledge of me, I consider to be just like my own self. Being engaged in my transcendental service, he is sure to assign me the highest and the most perfect good.
Krishna's heart is revealed here. He says udhara. Udhara means these other people who are sacrificing their time for me, they're magnanimous. They're sacrificing their time for me. Krishna is saying, I'm grateful to them for their service. But Jnani too, but the Jnani who worships only me, for whom nothing else is important. Atmaiva me matam. But he who is situated in complete knowledge of me, I consider to be just like my own self. You know that verse, Acharya mam vijaniyam, na avamanyeta akarhichit. The Acharya should be considered as my very self. This is why we say, the spiritual master is worshipped as good as God, because he's a perfect representative of God. It's the same point here. Or another way to phrase this is, we sing in the Samsara Davana prayers, Sakshat dharitvena samasta shastre ukta satava yata eva sadbhir. So Sakshat dharitvena. So the Guru is called Sakshat Hari. personally Hari who's present, and at the same time, Kintu Prabhorya Priya Evatasya, still he should be understood as someone who's very, very dear. Kintu Prabhorya Priya, Prabhor means Prabhu, the Supreme Lord. But should also be known as someone who's very dear to the Supreme Lord. So the spiritual master should be known as Sakshad Hari and Mukunda Preshtatve, or Hari Priya. Both these terms together apply to the spiritual master. One of them alone is insufficient to describe the spiritual master. Both of them taken together explain the position of the spiritual master. And that's being referenced here in this verse. Asita sahi yuktatma, being engaged in my devotional service. Mam eva anuttamam gatim. Uttamam, again, Krishna is saying, I am the supreme destination. I, a relationship with me. And he's saying that you can have a relationship with me at many different levels. But me, personally, that relationship of rasa with me, that is the highest way of attaining me. That highest type of relationship with me, that most intimate type of relationship with me, this Bhagavad Gyani achieves it. And he is the only one who achieves it. No one else does. So Prabhupada says, it is not that devotees who are less complete in knowledge are not dear to the Lord. The Lord says that all are magnanimous because anyone who comes to the Lord for any purpose is called a Mahatma or great soul. The devotees who want some benefit out of devotional service are accepted by the Lord because there is an exchange of affection. Out of affection, they ask the Lord for some material benefit, and when they get it, they become so satisfied that they also advance in devotional service. But the devotee in full knowledge is considered to be very dear to the Lord because his only purpose is to serve the Supreme Lord with love and devotion. Such a devotee cannot live a second without contacting or serving the Supreme Lord. Similarly, the Supreme Lord is very fond of his devotee and cannot be separated from him. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Lord says, Sadhavo hridayam mayyam, sadhunam hridayam tvaham, mad anyat tena jananti, naham tebyo managapi. The devotees are always in my heart and I'm always in the heart of the devotees. The devotee does not know anything beyond me, and I also cannot forget the devotee. There is a very intimate relationship between me and the pure devotees. Pure devotees in full knowledge are never out of spiritual touch, and therefore they are very much dear to me. There's a sequence of prayers, about 43 verses, recited by a great Acharya, Yamunacharya. This is called the Stotra Ratna. Now, one of the prayers in the Stotra Ratna, it starts with Sakritvad Akara Vilokanasha, etc. That prayer says, O Lord, please place me in the glance of those devotees who, in their anxiety to see you, consider material enjoyment and liberation to be like straw on the street, and from whom separation is completely unbearable, even for you. This is Yamunacharya's prayer. Extraordinary verse. It's a very sweet verse to memorize and offer to the Lord. Now here is the culmination and the center point of this entire chapter. This verse should practically be memorized, put up on a wall, every kind of prominence given to it. Bahunam janmanam mante jnanavan mam prapadyate vasudeva sarvamiti sa mahatma sudurlabha. This verse will be certainly one of the verses tested, by the way. Translation.
Often many verse unread, he who is actually knowledge surrenders into me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes and all beings. Such a great soul is very rare.
Bahunam janmanamante. So it may be that we will go through lifetimes after lifetimes to cultivate this understanding that Vasudeva Sarvamiti. But every experience that we go to in this world, we may travel the world, we may see different cultures, we may appreciate so many different things. But if the culmination of all of those experiences, some people say, for example, we go through lifetime after lifetime, learning different things and growing in different ways. If the culmination of all of those experiences of many lifetimes is this one thing, Vasudeva Sarvamiti, then that is the perfection, that is the ante, that is the conclusion of all of those realizations. Some people say, every life we should go and we should learn things, has anybody heard this philosophy before? Comes for people who follow past life regression or any of those other such New Age philosophies. But the point is, yes, you can go through all of life experiences, and it is true that the soul goes from life to life, going through different experiences that the soul desires and the soul needs. But the culmination of all those experiences is this one realization. However, whenever, in whichever way this realization is achieved, this is the goal of every type of cultivation of knowledge. If we can keep this as being the pinnacle of everything that we are studying, we are reading, we are researching, we're trying to understand, we're trying to experience, then we would know the end to which all our endeavors are pointing to. Sa Mahatma Sudurlabha, such a great soul is very, very rare. Now this word Mahatma is used in one other place in the Bhagavad Gita, and that is in the 9th chapter. If you go here to verse, I believe it is texts 13 and 14. So understanding this, what do these great Mahatmas do? Mahatmanas tumam partha devim prakritim ashrita. Understanding this, they take shelter of my Devi Prakriti, my internal energy. Bhajanti ananya manaso. They worship me with ananya, with an undeviated mind. Jnatva bhutadim avyam. Knowing that I am original. Adim avyayam, inexhaustible. I am the supreme cause, source of everything. And then, how do they worship me? Text 14. Satatam kirtayanto mam. They constantly glorify me. Yatantascha dridhavrataha, endeavoring with very great determination. Namasyantas chamam bhakti, offering obeisances unto me. Nitya yukta upasate, constantly engaging in the practices of pure bhakti, they worship me completely. So becoming a Mahatma means to acquire this realization. We use the word Mahatma very loosely and freely. Such a great soul, we say. Mahatma means one who comes to this realization and no one else. That Krishna is everything. And the activities of the Mahatma are therefore pure bhakti. So knowledge of Krishna leads to surrender. Surrender leads to bhakti. So knowledge, surrender, devotion. These are the three links that you will see as being the theme of these middle 6 chapters. Prabhupada says in the purport to text 19, the living entity, while executing devotional service or transcendental rituals after many, many births, may actually become situated in transcendental pure knowledge that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the ultimate goal of spiritual realization. In the beginning of spiritual realization, while one is trying to give up one's attachment to materialism, there is some leaning towards impersonalism. But when one is further advanced, he can understand that there are activities in spiritual life and these activities constitute devotional service. Realizing this, he becomes attached to the Supreme Personality of Godhead and surrenders unto Him. At such a time, one can understand that Lord Krishna's mercy is everything, that He is the cause of all causes, and this material manifestation is not independent from Him.